Mino Line Media presents the Business First Podcast.
Hi all, and welcome to a new episode of Business First with Sonia Aline. I am your host, and today we are going to discuss a very popular and very common business topic, leadership. And in studio with us to discuss this is Jenny Vasquez-Newsum. She's a facilitator, public speaker, and founder of Untapped Leaders, a leadership development organization. And she's also the author of the book by the same name, Untapped Leadership, Harnessing the Power of Underrepresented Leaders. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, thank you for being here. Before we take the deep dive into everything that we need to know and understand about leadership today, is tell us a little bit about your journey, because you actually left corporate America, working and training leaders, to now leading your own organization. So tell us a little bit about what helped you make that transition and what inspired you to do that work, to do this new work.
Absolutely. So my background is in education and nonprofit management. I worked in higher ed institutions as well as nonprofit organizations, kind of in the C-suite. And my most recent role was facilitating leadership development trainings, kind of cohort programs for leaders across stages of their careers, from high school students all the way through kind of executives in Fortune 500 organizations. And to be honest, 2020 was very much a core shaking year for me, as it was for, I think, a lot of us. And it really caused me to call into question how I'm utilizing my time and talent on this brief time on Earth, and really trying to think about, well, how can I bring in, the assets that I hold, but then also the ways that I see a lack of representation in the leadership space, in these spaces that has persisted for so long. And so that was really kind of the moment, the aha, that caused me to start, writing, and that the book came first. As I was writing the book, I was working still, and really just realizing that, I needed to operationalize this because it is necessary, particularly thinking about the leadership that's needed for today's world. It just was a moment of realizing I won't be able to have the impact I could have working within the system, quote unquote. I have to work outside of it. And so that's where this journey began.
Yeah. One of the things that was so interesting in your book, and I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it, is that 90% of our instruction and direction in the form of books, when I think about all the books that I have on leadership and all the books that had been recommended to me on leadership, have 90% of that is written by white men. And what I thought of immediately was there's a group that I follow on Instagram. I won't mention the name, but it's one of these goddess empowerment groups where women talk about, feminine power and tapping into, who we are. And one of the books on the reading list this summer was The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, which has been like the Bible for so many of us. And so, but even in that moment, it's interesting, as much as I've skimmed through the book, I've never felt inspired to read it. I've looked at the 48 laws and what the 48 laws are. But even in that moment, I was just like, really? Like, is that our only reference? Mm-hmm. And then, so when I read, what you wrote about 90% of our teaching comes from white men, is it because we just assume that because they're winning, they must know the formula, and so that's the formula to emulate?
So much to unpack in that question.
Ready,
yeah,
which is good.
Let's go. So there's a few things, because I truthfully, same experience as you, like in my management courses, all the way through, my doctoral degree, the syllabi were at that point 100% representation of white and male perspectives. And, while I was in it, I, kind of made things work for me, or just try to think about, okay, well, I can't do that. I'm a Black woman. I'm a, biracial Black woman. I don't think I can do these things that they're kind of purporting to do as leadership. But I was just in it. And so I think what I want to empathize with this group a little bit is, it's so much in the water that it takes a moment to realize, wait, what waters am I swimming in? And because we kind of are brought into this from very early, and then this is kind of the space that we're in. And so we might not know or think about or consider what else there might be, that when this is really being defined for us, and in a way that I think society places value on these 48 laws, these perspectives. There's a lot of value there. They have a lot of shelf space. They have a lot of airtime, and so that's all we kind of the messages that we will largely receive, and that takes some undoing to notice it, and then to say, well, actually this doesn't represent me, or this doesn't represent our group. This probably is not the best perspective. And so in a way, like, I empathize with that, and I see how that can happen. And now, I also think that there are a lot of perspectives, and fortunately a lot of, authors outside of myself that are writing from, the perspective that's not really told or hasn't been told since, the centuries of work that, white men have kind of held onto. And so it's hard. I mean, I think that it's a lot of unlearning for all of us to really consider, okay, well, who's my source? Is that the right source for me? And if not, where can I find my other sources? Maybe it's not in a published book, to be honest. Maybe it's in my family, my culture, the experience I have with someone around me. Like, I really get a question, like, where we're getting our sources when we're defining leadership for ourselves.
And so in you saying those things, what would be, if somebody then said to you, so what is leadership, right? If I'm supposed to believe that it can be broader, it can be redefined, then what would you say to someone who's just like, well, I need to understand what leadership is. So if I'm getting my information from poor sources, or if that's not the only source, then what else can I see? What else can I emulate?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that's a tough question. To define leadership, I hope we all have our own definitions of that, but we really kind of reflect on and think about what does that mean for me? So from my perspective, and really with writing Untapped Leadership, and really, studying the frameworks and theories that have come for centuries past that, have left a lot of us out in those studies and in those perspectives. And I think what has been largely missing from my perspective is this awareness and understanding of context within which we're leading. And so, thinking about those books, a lot of times it was the context of who I am as a biracial Black woman trying to emulate and do these things. The context was different. I could not do that. And so, I think when I come down to it, leadership is really the ability to understand and ground decisions within context, which means you're kind of contextually aware, but then also being agile within that. So that's a little bit of what I talk about in the book, is like this contextual agility is kind of at the source and like the foundation of leadership for me, the folks that I have really learned so much from and really have kind of taken notes from are those that are aware of all the things, the contextual realities that, their staff members, their team members are coming into the workplace with, the context of our society, all the layers and nuance that are at play, even the historical context that is informing the present moment. And folks that really kind of understand that, so that as their decisions are unfolding, they're not, damaging. They're not perpetuating a status quo. They're really kind of evolving and involving the moment, and then being agile within that, knowing that when we're kind of standing still, sometimes we're just holding on to something that maybe we shouldn't have. And so for me, again, I just really kind of thinking about if we can be contextually agile, then we're leading. And that it doesn't matter what position you're in. It really is, you can do that at any level, at any point in your career. And that is what I define as leadership.
As leadership. And so, the other thing, and I think it's an extension of that, what you just explained, you mentioned in your book, and I had forgotten about this, so I went back to watch it, but it's The Danger of the Single Story, the TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie. And so which is interesting because it's a 13-year-old TED Talk, right? And when I think about when I first watched it, which was maybe a couple years after she had done it, and everything that has changed in our society since then, right? It seemed even more important for us to understand, based on what you're saying, right? That we all have access to leadership if we choose to, right? And it is not something that's preserved for a particular group of people. It is something that we all have access to.
That's right. And I think, those traditional narratives around leadership, I mean, they were built in eras of exclusion. Some of those early theories were built to exclude, very I would say purposefully. And so, that single story, that exclusive narrative that puts leadership, quote unquote, at this very distant top. And again, the data will say not all of us can really access that equitably and equally, in that way. And so that already by design is taking our agency, our leadership agency, away from us, because it puts it at this very distant future or position, and that's really what I hope to kind of reframe, particularly in, again, today's world. More of our stories have leadership embedded in them. How can we look to those to really guide us through, the complexities of our realities, the complexities of work, of all these aspects that are really at play right now? How can we bring it back to center, bring it back to us, in that sense?
In your bio, you say that you've worked with either close to or more than 500. That's a lot of leaders, right? And so what would you say, I have a couple of questions for that. Your biggest lesson, or the biggest insight, I should say, that you've received from all of that. And then what in that has helped you now do the work that you're doing today?
Yeah. So a lot of my work is done through kind of cohort learning. So bringing people together from different industries, different sectors, different positions. Sometimes there will be kind of, parity in role type or whatnot, but, working with leaders in that type of space with the kind of almost a microcosm of the world in a way that is not necessarily company specific, organization specific, sector specific, allows or has allowed me to kind of see some of these threads that exist, regardless of industry, sector, position, role, that these commonalities that happen no matter who the person is or the organization is. And I think, a lot of the ahas that I pull into and think about through Untapped Leadership, through Untapped Leaders organization, is really grounded in those threads that, a lot of people, I do think, want to be able to lead as themselves, to, you know, there's kind of this tension point between fitting into like what's kind of been assigned and what is valued and all these aspects. And then thinking about the context within which we're like bringing in, you know, we all come from different and storied backgrounds and experiences, and that shapes who we are. And I find that there's oftentimes this like divorcing that happens when like the professional self, you know, is in play. And so I think that was one of my ahas, my, like, you know, the moments of really realizing that, you know, pretty baseline, no matter who you are, I will assert to say that you want to be seen, be valued, contribute meaningfully and from your perspective into whatever organization and role that you're in. And that has been kind of across the board. So that's really kind of, you know, shaped a lot of the way I see things. And I think that it was kind of a unique perspective to be in those rooms, because you know, the power of observation, of just observing those dynamics kind of unfurl, I think offers insight into thinking about, you know, whenever I work with an organization or whenever I work with a leader, I know some of those core tenets are there, and how can we uncover that? And that's really kind of the untapped piece of this all is, you know, there's a lot more there that I don't think we're tapping into, because these, you know, dynamics start to come into play when we think about like professional spaces.
Yeah. So that leads perfectly into this next question. She's been a marketing superstar in corporate America, Bosama St. John. She's worked for Pepsi, Uber, and her last gig was at Netflix. And I saw an interview where she did, and she said, I realized that if they were always going to see me as the Black girl, I'm just going to be myself. And so what is your thought on that in terms of when you talk about that divorcing that happens because people are trying to fit in, or we're worried that if we show up and be too much of ourselves, we might be too much for the room and too much for our peers. But it seemed to work. I don't know if it works for everybody.
That's right. But
it did seem to work for her. And so what did she get right in that equation?
Yeah, I appreciate you doubling back to say that it might not work for everybody, and I that's interesting. There's a lot of nuance to that, because I love Bosama St. John. I follow her. You know, it's really kind of been, you know, I get energy from seeing her authenticity and unapologetic authenticity, like not shying away from it. And you know, for me, I've always aimed to lead authentically, but I'll be honest, you know, I've edited in certain ways. I'll, you know, not say the thing that maybe, you know, no one else is saying. Like that's been very real for me. And kind of that navigating that is a reality. So for anyone like listening to like, oh, I can't be out there like Boz, you know, I empathize with that, because, you know, I think one element of the work that I do is around kind of systems thinking, power mapping, and this idea of operating in stealth mode that I think a lot of leaders of color, leaders with any marginalized identities in the workplace will operate kind of under the radar, try to be undetected to you know, succeed or, you know, persist through the work. And so, you know, I think what Boz did right. I mean, she comes with her receipts. She comes with her, like, you know, her impact. She comes with the number, whatever, you know, this is what I imagine, but she's very good at her job. So it doesn't matter, you know, all the kind of workplace bias that she might need to navigate. I bet she has a whole bunch. She had to. Right. She also came with the books, you know, with the impact that, you know, really did not allow room for that bias to affect her career. That's what I would assume. But again, for a lot of us, you know, who do have the receipts, you know, I don't like we've done the work, we shown and prove all that. I think it's hard. I think the game is not easy. And I, you know, when I usually work with leaders and work with leaders of color in particular, kind of navigating that same dance, it is, we're better equipped when we know, the spaces that we can push to be our most authentic self, and the repercussions and the risks are, calculated in that sense, that we kind of are aware that there's always, I do think Buzz has taken a lot of risk. And, I think she's known that, and she's calculated towards that, and has succeeded as a result. And so that's kind of the tension point.
And not without pain points. Yeah, I'm sure.
And not without pain points, right?
Yeah. So so the risks, right, are part of the whole journey.
Right.
Which is a little different than like someone like Renetta McCann, who's a little older, who was the CEO of Starcom, an international global advertising organization, who talked about the difficulty that she had navigating these rooms, that she couldn't be as forceful, she couldn't be as direct, and walking into rooms, and sometimes people thinking that she's the assistant and not the CEO. And so I'm wondering if, particularly with Rosalind Brewer just stepping down from Walgreens, right, and had previously stepped down from Sam's Club, what do you think that some of the challenges of women leaders who are obviously strong, obviously have the receipts, obviously have a strong record, still they're not maintaining these positions the way they'd like to maintain them?
Yeah. I mean, I think, this is where I really do stand behind the idea that the rules of the game are not the same. Even thinking about Rosalind and kind of her recent departure, I mean, she was leading a pharmaceutical company through the height of a pandemic, unprecedented global pandemic, leading this organization. And now the claim is that, her areas of expertise don't align with the company's future.
Yeah.
That's just put it on the list of things I'm not buying today. I don't see how that's the case. And so, I think this is the really tricky reality, and really kind of connected to those risks, and just knowing that, if we can't show up the way, again, sometimes white and male leaders can show up, really to that point of having to adjust tone, affect, kind of facial expressions, emotion, all these ways we have to be aware and self-edit, because it really is grounded in bias when we kind of think about, again, what people expect to see when they see a leader at the head of a table. As Black women, we're countering that, and that's very difficult in and of itself. And so then, I think the eyes and the ears are kind of prone to looking for any false move or anything that might just be a little different than what's expected. And so that's really difficult to navigate. And so, as I mentioned, I kind of talk about this as this kind of stealth mode operation that, in order to lead in these places and in these ways, we kind of have to operate on stealth mode to be to remain in good standing, we will say, in that sense. And so it's difficult because we have those two, examples, but Boz and Rosalind and folks kind of that have departed roles. I mean, I think all those examples have departed roles, and it speaks to the reality that even today, in our present world, we're not there yet. We have a very long way to go to actually have equitable access to these top roles, because even when someone's in it, their experience and what's expected of them is not the same.
Is not the same. And so, further to that, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Rosalind did move this company, this S&P company, through, unprecedented crisis times. Yeah. But it also goes to what you talk about in your book about us leading through adversity, which is almost seems like a natural thing for us. And it's the opportunity for us to actually shine. And so, there were a couple of folks that came to mind, like Ron Williams, who came into Aetna, Ursula Burns at Xerox, President Barack Obama in 2008, right? And the country was in a major recession. But even culturally, right? We tend to lead. In Living Color was the show that saved Fox. The Cosby Show saved NBC. Michael Jordan saved Nike. Run DMC saved Adidas. Is there a way that we can ride that? It seems like we're able to always, when a company, a country, an industry is in crisis, we know how to lead, right? And obviously it's from all of the things that we know adversity. Adversity is in our DNA, right? So we know how to overcome adversity. Is there a way that we can take that and extend the benefits of what we've done and not get punished for it, as like a Roz Brewer who did that, right? And was, as much as Barack Obama had gotten us through the recession, he really fought for his life in that for the re-election in 2012. And we see what has happened to Bill Cosby. There's a lot of arguments around that, but again, is there a way that we can extend, all the money that we put into people's pockets? Diddy with Ciroc, right? And I don't know if that's a question that we can answer, but I just think it's a question that we need to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that you're right, because it's so, you named so many examples, and time again, where we see kind of the same phenomena. And I think, the idea that we're asking this question, how do we extend this, influence, impact, and then again, be valued for what is happening here. That is a deep systemic question, I would say, because it is pretty big on really kind of thinking about, sometimes the cleanup that happens that, I think leaders of color, marginalized leaders, that will come and do for organizations, for industries, really with this idea and perspective that one understands adversity and kind of resilience in a way that is so connected to lived experience a lot of times, that's the way we're just naturally built to have that fortitude to move through and figure it out and strategize, and kind of just these innate abilities because of that lived experience. And then also, I think, in the ways we have been marginalized, or just at least have these perspectives that may not be at the center of an industry, of an organization, just really kind of this viewpoint, the standpoint that is given us some, I think, unique insights into the challenge at hand. And so when you kind of think about all those people you named, or the kind of the folks that really saved, or perspectives that really saved a television station or industry or whatnot, I'd argue that they understand that context much better, because they know there's a whole audience that isn't being tapped into, or there's a whole market that's not being spoken to, or all these ways that they really can see the opportunity in the room that those that are maybe too close to the power, the center, the story, the single story, all that won't be able to see, because that's just not the perspective that they bring in. And so I think the tough part of your question is, though, how do we kind of maintain that value within those that are doing the work, or maintain that influence, so that it becomes a game that is much more fair. That is, not us saving industries and then kind of the industry moving on, and then we're still not at the head of these tables. So,
part of the frustration, or I should say, part of the reason that Black women and women of color are starting businesses at the rate that they are is because of the frustration for leadership opportunities in corporate America. And so what would you say to those, not just women, but those people who are leaving corporate America with skills, knowledge, receipts, and everything else? What is some of the strongest advice you can give them as they are starting their own business, and to those who are listening who are, starting companies, developing companies, growing companies, what they should understand about leadership skills and the importance of their unique story and their unique experiences, what they bring culturally to any landscape now that they are going to, take dominion over.
Yeah. I applaud those that are doing this. Like, we're kind of creating our own tables, own spaces, own lanes, because, I think the ceilings and the limitations are very real. I think a lot of times that folks are experiencing, and now kind of creating something on their own. Creating something on your own is like also very unnerving. It's disorienting. It's kind of like, trying to figure it all out. Particularly if you're I'm just reflecting on my own experience here, but reflecting on, navigating within structures and now kind of creating your own. And my best piece of advice, and something that I try to remind myself of, is that, I have all the tools. I have the receipts. I'm equipped. I may not have done this before, but I have, experience and expertise from past roles and past organizations of what to do, what not to do, what I would change from what is the ideal organization, workplace structure, approach that I want to make, and really leaning confidently into that. Really, even, when the confidence kind of disappears a little bit while you're trying to figure it out, just go back to that confidence. Like, no, actually, I have a very unique perspective in this particular industry because I've been in it and I see what does not work. And so I think that if you really kind of lean into that, I frame it a little bit in the book around kind of this zone of untapped capacity. That's really where, one, you find your flow, your kind of zone of genius, like you're really kind of doing the work that you enjoy and you're good at. But then two, I think you find those lanes that no one else is doing, can really find that unique value add that your company, your consulting, your organization, whatever it is filling, because we need it. I will just venture to say, like, we need it, whatever it is. I can imagine that it's needed. So
I like
that's
that
my advice.
You named it untapped capacity, because I think that's what that was familiar to me. I don't know if I had a name for it, but I think we all know in these positions, whether we're working for somebody or whether we're working for ourselves, there's something in us that knows we can do it, because it's why it won't leave us. It's why we keep pushing toward it. But, we're still a little unsure, right? Because we haven't really done it, or we haven't been allowed to do it, or someone didn't listen to us when we were making these suggestions. And so, how can you really, if you haven't said it already, like really solidify ourselves in this area of untapped capacity?
Yes. So and just to kind of frame it, when I think about that zone, it's like really bridging the ways we have power and privilege. We all have it, and really kind of naming, what power of experience, of title, of whatever that may be, and really bringing in and bridging in those marginalized identities or perspectives that you don't see represented, or these views that what's in your belly, like, okay, this isn't working for me, or this, there's something here that I'm experiencing and I'm not seeing anyone talk about it. It is this moment of like really leaning into confidence, into that little tiny voice that is sitting with you. But I think what makes it, accessible is thinking about the ways you do have power, that you can kind of think, well, I'm gonna pull this lever to make sure that this little voice has more of a mic, or this little voice has more of an impact. And so it's kind of like bridging these two in a way that then it reminds us of our agency, ultimately, that we all have agency, and I think a world that tells us we don't, we don't want to listen to that. So how can we leverage and utilize these tools to bring us back to that agency, and then take action, then do something with that.
So leaders can be born, but they can also be developed, groomed, and supported to be leaders.
Absolutely, anybody can lead. I will put that out there. Anybody. Yeah.
So where can we find you, more of your work, and your book, your content? Tell us how we can stay in touch and follow you.
Absolutely. So everything is at untappedleaders.com. So that's where we have our cohort programs, our leadership platform. We have a free newsletter if you want to kind of think about, leading differently and from perspectives that are often overlooked. That's for anybody. And then you can find me at Jenny Vasquez-Newsum, 2 Z's. I know it's a little long, but I like for folks to spell out my whole name because, that's the familiarity with it. So, but yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay. And you also have a YouTube channel?
I do. I'll post every now and then. So, at Jenny Vasquez-Newsum, same thing. And then you can find the same place. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you for coming on and sharing your insight. Please go out and get the book. It's available on Amazon, I imagine.
It is. Everywhere
on your
books are sold. Yep.
Okay, very good. So we want to support you in that as well.
Thank you.
And please let us know how things progress, and anything else that we can support you with, so that we can get this information out to more and more people.
I appreciate that. This was such a great conversation. Thank you for the kind of thoughtful exchange and deep questions. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back again next week with another dynamic guest. Thank you.
The Business First podcast is hosted and produced by Sonia Aline. Executive producer Ken Johnson. Find the Business First podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Odyssey, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcast. On social media on IG at business_first_podcast. Follow the Mean Old Line Media Podcast Network on IG at Mean Old Line Media. Get the Mean Old Line Media app in the App Store or Google Play. The Business First Podcast is a Mean Old Line Media production.